Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here at the Council. It's an honor to serve on its board and to be part of the Executive Committee, and also I'm pleased to have played a role in encouraging the Council to focus on Afghanistan as well. Delighted to be with this panel. Got a great friend and colleague from many years, Ashley Tellis. We were colleagues at RAND many years ago, and the two distinguished other participants, the minister and the ambassador. And thanks to you, Bharat, for your leadership of the South Asia Center here. Well, I'll be very brief. We want to have time for discussion and question and answer. I would like to say that the regional dimension, which is the focus of this discussion, of the Afghan situation or of the Afghan problem, is one of the most important, if not the most important. It's one of the most important factors affecting Afghanistan in all its dimensions, including with regard to the security situation that Bharat mentioned, that has deteriorated in recent times. And it has been the most also challenging and the most difficult to get one's arms around and to make progress with regard. The discussions are often focused with regard to Afghanistan in recent weeks in Washington on the number of troops that the U.S. should or should not send. A mini surge has been talked about, and people have said this sounds all very familiar. We have sort of done these things before, and I believe that while focus on what needs to be done by the United States and its allies and the Afghans as to prevent the further deterioration of the situation security-wise in Afghanistan. There are two other dimensions that are very important in order to achieve success or make progress, and those are one, the issue of reconciliation and internal settlement in Afghanistan to end the civil war. But to achieve that, they really at a very big level, assuming as I do that our objective essentially remain the same, although in detail as to what means should our priority may vary, the objective of precluding Afghanistan becoming once again a base for international terrorists. That's what got the United States involved. There was no plan to go to Afghanistan before 9/11. If the objective remains the same, and on top of that, to preserve the gains that have been made, the reconstitution of the Afghan state as a subsidiary objective, and the question is, what can be done on what needs to be happening inside Afghanistan, and what needs to happen in terms of the regional context, in addition to what may be needed to improve, to shore up the security situation so that it doesn't deteriorate. Because in my judgment at least, if the security situation continues to deteriorate against the government of Afghanistan, that reduces the prospect, in my judgment, for a settlement, because if the opposition believes that time is on its side, it can win, it will be less likely to negotiate a peaceful settlement or a reconciliation agreement. So that obviously is an objective, an imperative. The question is, how do we get from here to there to get a reconciliation agreement, and what is the role that the regional dimension in this, which is the focus of the discussion today, and what should be done in that regard. Of course, one of the complications with regard to the regional situation that I believe has had a very negative effect, there are lots of regional issues. and they're not equally important. So I'll start with what I regard to be the most important regional issue, and that is the relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Among all the Afghanistan regional relations, that's the most important, the most consequential, and in my judgment, that has been the most unhelpful in terms of the effects on the situation in Afghanistan. And why do I say that? Although others have their own relations with Afghanistan, I'll come to why do I believe that Pakistan's relations with Afghanistan is the most important. I will not talk about the kind of the neighborly, the length of the border, the kind of population composition along the border on the two sides, the Durand Line issues, the refugee issues, Pakistan's role during the Soviet occupation, the housing of millions of Afghan refugees. I'll talk about this really the kind of the current environment post 9/11 and what has been the complication. Pakistan was one of the three countries that recognized the Taliban government. After 9/11, under enormous pressure from the United States, Pakistan cooperated with the United States in the overthrow of the Taliban after trying and not succeeding to convince the leadership of the Taliban to turn over to the United States Al-Qaeda leadership, and as our goal was to bring them, the Al-Qaeda leadership, to justice. Now, President Musharraf, in his book, who was the leader of Pakistan at that time, wrote that he did that reluctantly, but he had to, because of Pakistan's supreme national interest required, given the pressure on the part of the United States. But then I think, and I believe that Pakistan did provide significant assistance to our movement of forces into Afghanistan, overflights, then later on use of Pakistani lines to bring supplies to Afghanistan. It also later provided help with regard to Al-Qaeda, arrest of some, and a number of others that for the reasons of time I won't go into. But on one thing, over time, the situation became difficult between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that was the central complication, in my judgment, for the difficulties that Afghanistan is having, and that was that a sanctuary began to develop in Pakistan by groups who had been defeated initially in Afghanistan, the Taliban and associated groups, the Haqqani network, taking refuge to Pakistan and regrouping and coming back to challenge the Afghan government and those who supported the Afghan government. Now, I believe that after initially doubting that there was a sanctuary in Pakistan and that if the problem that started were in Afghanistan, the United States became increasingly convinced over time that there was the problem of a sanctuary in Pakistan, and that there was a need for the two sides, the Afghans and the Pakistanis, to come together, because we regarded Afghanistan obviously as a new partner, Pakistan partner that we've had relations with for some time to work things together. During my time of involvement with regard to the U.S.-Afghan policy, when I was a special envoy and then as ambassador, I know that President Bush, during his period, tried very hard by inviting President Karzai and President Musharraf, by having trilateral groups being formed in the area by security people to see if what could be done to improve things. But things did not progress the way we would have hoped. For a long time, and I had the honor of a meeting with President Musharraf. Myself, when I was ambassador in Afghanistan, when the President asked me to go talk with him about the sanctuary, there was the issue of Pakistan denying initially that there was such a thing as a sanctuary in Pakistan. You asked me for the names and addresses, for example, of the groups. I think that has been one obstacle for getting an agreement between Afghanistan and Pakistan, that recognizing that there is this problem of the sanctuary, because we all know that the leadership of the Taliban are called the Quetta Shura, of course. We know that there is also Peshawar Shura. We know that there is a Haqqani network that's affiliated with the Taliban, also affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda recognizes the Taliban leadership as its leadership, to ultimately recognizing the Taliban leader as the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the faithful. That has been a difficulty. Now, in more recent years, there has been some progress on this issue, but I think still there is that issue of the sanctuary from where the people who are fighting the Afghans and the coalition forces, the leaders are based in or present in Pakistan. That cannot be disputed easily, but there are then subsequent sort of issues. Are they getting supplies, those forces there? Are they getting training there? Are they recovering there? Are they when they get wounded, they receive medical care there? Where does the logistic lines of this fight? How far or how deep does it go into Pakistan? And I believe that there has also been an issue, and I hope that we can make progress as the administration focuses on the Afghan issue and comes to a decision, besides the numbers, to shore up the situation perhaps, is the issue of what to do about this. If I am right, if people agree that this is a central factor that shapes the battle, and I will try to finish very quickly, what should be done, what lessons can be learned from the effort that we have made before that has not worked. I know that the Afghan government, particularly President Ghani, has tried very hard when he came to power to address this issue, to focus sharply on it, to come to some sort of an understanding. And even yesterday, there was a Kabul process meeting, and he said it's not clear to him what the Pakistan government wants in return for which it could. That he didn't say, but that was the implication, that in return for which the sanctuary could end. My proposal has been and continues to be, with regard to Pakistan, that Pakistan has legitimate interests. The Afghans have to accept it. We have to accept it, that Pakistan has legitimate interests. Those legitimate interests need to be addressed. They need to be specified what they are. And in exchange for that, Pakistan should be encouraging, using its influence with the Taliban to enter a serious peace process agreement, and at the same time, for its vital national interests, it's for Pakistan to decide. But my proposal, my suggestion has been that it has to tell the Taliban that if they don't enter a peace process, they will not be allowed to operate from Pakistan. That Pakistan would not take responsibility for them in Pakistan. That Pakistan can play a role in facilitating a peace agreement, but if their plan is to fight the Americans and fight the Afghans, they're not going to be a platform from which they can go and recover and issue statements and declare jihad and get together to appoint their new leader, and all the rest. Now, the Haqqani group is a little different. It's related, on the one hand, to the Taliban, and it's related, as I said before, with Al-Qaeda. But we regard the Haqqani network as a terrorist organization. It has had historic ties with Pakistan. I've been myself involved in these policy issues, fortunately or unfortunately, for a very long time. So I know them quite well, and their relationship dating back to the 1980s. Now, if, for example, I don't know what the actual target of this bomb that killed 150 Afghans and wounded 300 or more, I don't know what the actual target was, because the truck was stopped and by the Afghan police before it could enter the green zone. I suspect if they had gotten through, the objective may have been something different, one of the hardened targets inside. But given the magnitude of what happened, the devastation happened, it changes things qualitatively, in my view. It can't be just yet another bomb in Afghanistan kind of attitude. And that if it's true, and I believe the Afghans who made the charge that the Haqqani network did this, they make further charges with regard to the Pakistan role. If they have evidence, they need to share it with Pakistan, they need to share it with the world, the international community. And if that's compelling, that then I think obligates, in my judgment, at least there will be an expectation that Pakistan needs to deal with the Haqqani network differently than it has so far. Now, I know there are issues with regard to Indo-Pakistan rivalry in Afghanistan. I'm sure my colleagues will get into this, but my final thought is that since we're in Washington, that the administration, since it's not completed its review, and I'm not alarmed that the review has taken so long, it's good to have a deliberate review. You don't want to do these reviews every year because you quickly came to some judgment and then you have to review again, as it's happened at times in the past, where we had one review followed in a year by another review. Or we make an announcement, then we put a deadline kind of for the surge and the end of the surge, so that it has V-shapes the positive effects from the start, that it needs to different. One is the showing up for the objective that reasons that I described. What is required internally in Afghanistan to get to this negotiated settlement that I talked about, and what is the regional, and particularly how does the United States and the coalition, working with local partners, get an agreement, an understanding, a settlement, progress between Afghanistan and Pakistan, something that has eluded us, except momentarily at times. We've had sometimes successes momentarily around an election. When I was in Afghanistan in 2004, we got an understanding for the duration of the election, but that deals with the issue of sanctuary and the reconciliation, and the issues that makes it difficult or has made it unlikely or has made it impossible to achieve the success that we have sought since. Why what we have tried has not worked, and what may be required for it to work. And I've had in various fora some proposals in that regard as well. But I'll stop here, and I'm sure we will have opportunities to go back and forth and respond to questions.
Thank you, Zal. Ambassador, the stage is right set for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I must thank Atlantic Council and Bharat, in particular you, for inviting me. And I've been here before, you were rightly mentioned. And I'm glad that every time I come here, it works well for you or somebody else. Yeah. So that's good. And of course, I must also start by expressing our strongest condemnation of the horrible terrorist attack that took place in Kabul. So many innocent lives were lost, and we were very, very saddened, and we condemned with all the might that we have. We should do that. And it is unfortunate that right after the attack took place, within minutes, NDS, the Afghan National Intelligence Agency, deemed it fit that it should be blamed on Pakistan. And that is the sad story, which is blocking progress, that this mistrust of blaming anything and everything on Pakistan, whatever may happen. There are countless issues of governance, of corruption, of drug trade, of economic stress, or what have you. And to say that everything is Pakistan is responsible for everything, I think is oversimplistic. And if we keep doing that, and if that remains the assumption, then you are barking the wrong tree. Then you will not be able to get to the solution. And therefore, it is extremely important that we recognize, as you rightly mentioned, what is Pakistan's legitimate interest in Afghanistan. Now, let me tell you what our legitimate interest in Afghanistan is. We want to see a peaceful, stable, sovereign, prosperous Afghanistan. Why? Not only because the people of Afghanistan, we share a cultural bond with them, a historical bond with them, affinities and fraternities that go back in time, but also because we have suffered. Whenever there is instability in Afghanistan, we suffer. Remember December 1979? All that period, who suffered? We had done 5 million refugees. Now we have 3 million refugees for 37 years. They're still with us. And when the Soviets left and the Americans left, it was us who were hosting these people. And when the 9/11 happened and Tora Bora bomb was bombed heavily, all these militants crossed over to these mountains called tribal areas in Pakistan. So that's where it became our problem. And when we joined the international coalition against them, as you mentioned, against the Taliban and the others, we became a legitimate target for these militants. And our cities and our villages and our schools and our facilities and installations became a legitimate target. Hardly a day passed when they were not targeting us. We suffered. We know how much we suffered. Until 2013, when the present government took over, they said, all right, we first need to build a consensus, because there was a narrative that was prevailing at that time that Afghanistan was under occupation, first by the Soviets and we kicked them out, and now by America, and therefore we need to kick them out. Now that was a flawed narrative. We knew that was a flawed narrative, but somebody had to do something about it to expose it. Because when you kill innocent people on the streets and on the markets and in the schools, that is no holy duty. That is a wrong and totally unacceptable version of the Islamic principles. Islam means peace, and therefore these people were not representing Islam when they were doing that. So that narrative had to be exposed. So we had a series of political conferences in 2013, which led to that nationwide consensus that terrorism and violence for any cause and under any pretext is not acceptable. And once we had that, our military moved into North Waziristan. You rightly mentioned that these people had holed in, they had built their sanctuaries, they had built their hideouts, and we started removing them. And because we had that consensus within the country, it was a rather smooth sail, and we were able to eliminate all those sanctuaries and the safe havens, what you call them as safe havens. It came as a heavy cost. 5,000 of our soldiers and officers lost lives, several thousand civilians too. But we were happy that today, every inch of that territory is under state control. Every inch of that territory is under state control. 95% of the people who had been displaced by Al-Qaeda and Taliban and other militants have come back. They are stitching together their lives. And for your information, and I hope that you go back there to see for yourself how the Pakistan government and United States government are working together to build those roads and their schools and what have you. And now we have a political package going into that area, an area, mind you, which for centuries had not seen a settled governance. You know that. dating back to the late 19th centuries. And that was, this area today is seeing that, those prospects of settled governance. And I think we have shown, and the proof of that is that in Pakistan itself, the number of terrorist incidents, which were something like 150 per month, right up to 2014, is now down to fingers of a single hand. And that in turn, ladies and gentlemen, has also had a salutary effect on the economic situation. Our economic indicators are now going up, our growth rate has gone up, our World Bank has actually raised it even beyond our own government projections. Fiscal deficits are down, exchange rates are better, the foreign exchange reserves have gone up, stock market is booming, so things are looking up for us, and we are very happy about it. And we think that all these gains that we made, both in the economic domain and in the security domain, could be at risk if Afghanistan is not stable. Because it's an open border, and any time this instability comes to us, and already it is happening because ISIS is now gaining roots in a province called Nangarhar, which is the eastern province next to Pakistan border. So we have a genuine interest in seeing Afghanistan. It's a vested national interest for Pakistan to see Afghanistan stable. Why would we want to see Afghanistan unstable? Who will lose and who will gain? Put it on the table and you would see that it is Pakistan who gains the most. And therefore it is equally sad when Afghan leadership continues to deflect attention from the internal problems and finds a bogey in Pakistan. That's not the solution, sir. Solution is for the Afghan government and Pakistan government to work together, because these terrorists are nobody's friend. They're everybody's enemy, and we need to join hands. And once you deflect attention from them to Pakistan, what you are trying to do is giving them the space that they don't deserve, that they don't need. Haqqanis and Taliban are not our friends. They are not our proxies. They are not our bet. They are not our hedge. People of Pakistan don't share their worldview. They are on the run. We're squeezing space on them. Bulk of them have moved to Afghanistan. What shuras are you talking about? Now people are talking about Nangarhar Shura and there is a Kunar Shura. What Quetta Shura? What Peshawar Shura? These are phantoms and ghosts that have been created because to deflect the attention from that. I think what is important is that we have to understand that the solution lies within Afghanistan. And that is why it is important that first you got to recognize that we need a solution, and we therefore, and we think also that the United States also has an interest in seeing Afghanistan stabilized. After all, 15 to 16 years, billions of investments in economic and military terms, they need to see peace of Afghanistan. They need to bring this to a logical end. And therefore, there is an opportunity for all of us, for Pakistan and the United States, as well indeed others, to work together. Now, we are waiting for the US review, of course, we are all waiting, but I share the objective that you mentioned in Afghanistan. To see a peaceful Afghanistan, I will go even beyond what you stated, Dr. Khalilzad, that we need a peaceful, stable, sovereign, independent, prosperous Afghanistan. That should be the objective. One in which there should be no ungoverned spaces. The one in which should Al-Qaeda or Taliban or nobody should ever be able to take its roots and challenge the norms of humanity and norms of civilization. And therefore, we share that objective. And we are ready to work, and we have worked together. If Al-Qaeda doesn't exist today, it is because Pakistan captured 1,100 Al-Qaeda operatives at a huge cost to us. But we did that. And we are ready to work with all that because these Haqqanis and Taliban, they are not our friends. They have spoiled our relations with Afghanistan. They have spoiled our relations with the United States. We don't want them. And they're on the run. But their recruitment base and their financial base is in Afghanistan. One has to understand that it is in Afghanistan. And therefore, we need to sit together. Even yesterday, when there was a meet in Kabul, we were expecting that it would be an effort to build regional consensus. What did President Ashraf Ghani do? Pardon my saying, I shouldn't be commenting on an honorable president. But he put the blame on Pakistan once again. Why? He should use this to build consensus for regional stability in Afghanistan, not to target Pakistan, not to isolate Pakistan. If you keep doing that, how would you come out of it? That's the one most important relationship for peace in you mentioned yourself, Pakistan and Afghanistan relationship is a most crucial, important relationship. And therefore, we want them to come, we want the US to come, we want everybody to come and see for yourself what has happened in tribal areas. See what has happened, what change has occurred there, what safe havens, what centuries are we talking about? If you want to live in the past, of course there are so many things that have happened in the past. So I think that is one thing. But the objective is the three elements that the US strategy, we don't know. We don't know the US strategy. Okay, I'll wrap it up. Three elements. One, political stability in Afghanistan, which means that strong national unity government. We have accepted that as a legitimate government. And Taliban know it. But it is for the Afghan government to decide how it wants to promote reconciliation. They can't put it on Pakistan. We tried twice, 2015, 2016, it didn't work. And I think our ability to promote reconciliation is not there anymore, or it has eroded, shall we say, because of several factors. One, because they are on the run. They are not in Pakistan, they are on the run. And second, also because there are regional issues within this context. The second is Afghan National Security Forces. Extremely important that their capacity must be bolstered, and we are ready to facilitate that. We have made many offers that they be trained. They actually used to be trained in Pakistani institutions, but it has been stopped by the Afghan leadership. We don't know why. They've gone now somewhere else. The third is working for seeking a regional consensus for stability in Afghanistan. I think that's equally important, and that's why Pakistan participated in the June meeting, and we will participate in all such meetings, because that's our ultimate legitimate interest in Afghanistan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador. And on that point, the stage is set for Minister Tiwari.
Dr. Gopalaswamy, Ambassador Khalilzad, Ambassador Ahmed, my distinguished friend and colleague, Mr. Ashley Tellis, ladies and gentlemen. We've heard two very thought-provoking presentations on the situation in Afghanistan. Now, everybody has their own favorite story about this conflict. And let me begin by telling you my story. So last year, one morning at 5 a.m., while we were checking out of a hotel, I ran into the former chief of the Afghan National Army. So I asked him, General, what's the situation in Afghanistan? He turned around and looked at me and said that, look, we have 30 newspapers in Afghanistan. We have radio stations in Afghanistan. We have television in Afghanistan. We have girls going to school in Afghanistan. We have the ability, or our people have the ability, to go and tell the president of Afghanistan that this is wrong and this is right. And it struck me that here was a man who had commanded troops in battle, who had led the Afghan National Army. He wasn't telling me that he had defeated the Taliban in Nangarhar or he had defeated the enemy somewhere else. He was actually trying to quantify in intangibles the progress which Afghan society has made over the past 17 years. And I think it's important to keep in mind that's what is really at stake as we speak about the situation in Afghanistan today. You know, all of us have a long institutional memory, a long historical memory about what happened between 1979 and 2017. But let's also not forget that a child who was born in 1979, if he would have survived till today, he would be 38 years old. And in 38 years, he's only seen conflict, he's only seen war, he's only seen aggression and attrition as the natural state of things. And I think it's important that we recognize the tragedy of the Afghan people and really endeavor to change that. You know, as insofar as India is concerned, one of our very distinguished editors some time ago had written a very thought-provoking piece about what are the strategic interests that India has in Afghanistan. And if I was to step back and answer that question, the only strategic interest that we have in Afghanistan is a peaceful, prosperous, stable Afghanistan. And that's why between 2001 and 2017, all the contribution which the Indian state has made, irrespective of whichever government has been there, the NDA-led BJP government earlier, our government for 10 long years, and then the NDA-led BJP government again, there has been a consistent thread which has run through our engagement with Afghanistan, characterized by a strategic partnership in 2012, that we would contribute to the development of Afghanistan, building infrastructure in Afghanistan, providing medical facilities in Afghanistan, and not doing anything which in any manner disrupts or disturbs the peace in Afghanistan. And that's why when international polling agencies, and as a politician, that's something which you kind of look at very carefully, really poll the people of Afghanistan, it comes back with one consistent result, that India and Indian people continue to be the most popular in terms of whom Afghanistan considers as their friend. You know, the ambassador was very correct when he talked about instinctive finger pointing. And he alluded to the statement which President Ashraf Ghani made during the Kabul process. But the fact remains that the same President Ashraf Ghani, when he took office, actually broke protocol and made a trek to General Headquarters in Rawalpindi in order to try and buy that peace for his people. And unfortunately, he must be a very bitter man. He must be a very belied man. That the leader of Afghanistan, the legitimately elected president of Afghanistan, when he convenes the Kabul process, is actually constrained to say that we are at the receiving end of an undeclared war by Pakistan. Those are extremely strong statements coming from a head of state. So I think before really blaming the Afghans for being instinctively reflexive in their determination or attempt or endeavor to try and deflect attention from domestic failure, there is a need to reflect and introspect as to why a relationship which President Ghani tried to start off at such a positive note has now reached a point whereby whether there is a rocket attack on the residence of the Indian ambassador the same day as the Kabul process commences, or 300 people or 150 people lose their lives, 300 people are injured in a truck bomb explosion, the finger of suspicion, unfortunately, is pointed by the Afghan leadership towards their neighbor. And that's the reason why we would want the United States of America to remain engaged in Afghanistan. The United States of America still continues to be the largest or the most influential outside power balancer in various regions of the world. And notwithstanding the propensity of the present administration to try and withdraw from that global role, I think the United States should very seriously introspect. There's a lot of blood and treasure which they have invested in Afghanistan over the last 16 years. And they need to recall, because lessons from history, if not learnt, unfortunately can prove very costly. That when they decided to disengage, how quickly the situation slipped and how quickly the Taliban ultimately ended up sheltering the Al-Qaeda and what followed is history. And therefore, this artificial distinction which is being sought to be made, that you need to set a thief to catch a thief, so therefore you need to make peace with Taliban in order to fight the Daesh, in our respectful opinion, and I can speak for India, is a completely flawed and an erroneous policy. Yes, President Ashraf Ghani, I think anybody would want the best for his people, did again hold out the olive branch to the Taliban at the Kabul meet, and therefore he is legitimately entitled to do so. But in our respectful opinion, this distinction between a good terrorist and a bad terrorist, a good Taliban and a bad Taliban, which ultimately may end up as good Daesh and bad Daesh, is a completely and absolutely flawed strategy to begin with. And let me conclude by saying that there is a need for the region at large to introspect. Unfortunately, the India-Pakistan paradigm holds the destiny of 2 billion people in South Asia to ransom. There is a lot of potential in that region. There is a lot of development which can take place in that region. And therefore, I think it is in our interest to try and ensure that whether it is Afghanistan or whether it is our bilateral relationship, we find a modus vivendi which ultimately does not really impede the progress of almost a quarter of humanity which resides in that region called South Asia, and I would stop at that. Thank you.
Ashley?
Thank you, Bharat, for inviting me to this panel, and thanks to all my distinguished panelists for the remarks that they've offered. I want to speak about a regional power, the United States. I think it's really the most important regional power, and the choices that the U.S. makes will determine greatly the prospects for our continuing success in Afghanistan. I want to make 3 basic points this morning. First, when people think about the last 17 years of violence in Afghanistan, there is a temptation to believe that this has been a story primarily of woe, that it's a story of imperfection, it's a story of weakness, and a story of lack of success. I would argue that while there is much to commend in those judgments, Afghanistan in many ways has been far more successful than we are willing to admit. That this is a country that has now been at war for close to 40 years. And despite being at war for close to 40 years, after 17 years of international commitment to this country, we now have a functioning Afghan state. May not be at the levels of performance that we would like, but nonetheless a state that exists and is effective, that is representative of its people's aspirations. We have Afghan National Security Forces that have once again been reconstituted after being battered in the anti-Soviet war. We have an economy that actually has shown signs of progress, and despite the pullout of international forces, actually is enjoying positive growth. And the United States has made great successes in being able to decimate the leadership of Al-Qaeda with Pakistan's cooperation over the last several years. So there's much to be grateful for, and there's much to be satisfied about. But I think the risks to these achievements are still very great. And the greatest risk to this achievement, in my view, is the fact that there is a continuing insurgency that seems very hard to extinguish. And as the administration begins to work its review, it becomes really critical for the United States to clarify first and foremost for itself, what is it that it is doing in Afghanistan? I think it is important for us to be able to, with great clarity, tell the international community that we have been in Afghanistan in order to prevent this country from once again becoming a sanctuary for terrorism, not just simply terrorism of global reach, but terrorism that can also have very painful regional consequences. We want to prevent Afghanistan from once again returning to the state it was in prior to 2001. And to make that happen, there is no alternative but to really invest in protecting the Afghan state. And in deference to the political currents of our time in the United States, I think part of that strategy of protection must now focus on exploring a political settlement with the Taliban. I say this not because I'm a fan of the political settlement, not because I think it is easy, but because I worry that the stress of an open-ended and continuing war in Afghanistan will undermine both the achievements that we've had in the last 17 years and bring us once again back to that outcome that we want to avoid, which is the return of Afghanistan as a sanctuary for international terrorism. So that's point number one. Point number two, US contributions to Afghanistan will be far more important for success in this region than anything that can be achieved through a regional approach. I say this because the region and the international community will follow the United States in the choices that we make. It cannot function as a substitute for the United States. And therefore, US contributions really become critical. But let me say something about the region before I come to the specificity of US contributions. If there is any one country that matters in the region more than most for the success of our achievement in Afghanistan, it is going to be Pakistan. For the simple reasons of the tyranny of geography, not to mention history. Pakistan is Afghanistan's neighbor, and whether we like it or not, a great deal of the resources and the sustenance for the insurgency still derives from the fact that the Taliban has roots in Pakistan. I think Ambassador Chowdhury is absolutely right that you cannot pretend that the Taliban is sustained simply by a sanctuary in Pakistan. They do have indigenous sources of support within Afghanistan itself, and they feed off the weaknesses in Afghan governance and the failures of the Afghan state. But those challenges are only exacerbated by the fact that they continue to have Pakistan, which the United States cannot reach, which the Afghan National Security Forces cannot reach, and which Pakistan, for its own strategic reasons, has chosen not to reach. What are those reasons? To my mind, as Ambassador Khalilzad noted, Pakistan has legitimate interests in Afghanistan. It seeks a secure frontier and it seeks a peaceful neighborhood. But the risk that Pakistan faces, if it overplays its hand in terms of supporting the Taliban, is that one, it will make the US mission in Afghanistan harder to achieve. And if the US mission in Afghanistan fails, of course the United States will bear the costs of that failure. But the Afghans will bear even greater costs, and Pakistan will not be very far behind. And so I think it becomes important that Pakistan consider the efforts it can make to bring the Taliban to the negotiating table and work with the Afghan state in forging that political settlement that I think is necessary, given that an open-ended US military campaign in Afghanistan is now increasingly implausible. I think Pakistan should also consider another reality. Today, with the Trump administration in Washington, there is a real possibility that the United States, if it is not successful within some perceptible period of time, could choose to reduce its commitment to Afghanistan and ultimately withdraw. If that outcome occurs, the door will be opened to internecine a regional competition in Afghanistan, which will only make circumstances in Afghanistan worse. First again for Afghanistan, but quickly thereafter for Pakistan. And so from a point of view of Pakistan's own self-interest, I think it is worthwhile for Pakistan to redouble its efforts in working with the United States and the Afghan government to compel the Taliban, and I use the word compel advisedly because that is what will be required, to come to the negotiating table and forge a solution that is minimally acceptable to all sides. My third point, even as all this happens, the United States still has to take primary responsibility for safeguarding the achievements that have been realized in Afghanistan so far. And I want to flag 6 things that the United States needs to do, hopefully as part of this review in the next few weeks or the next few months. The first is that we have to commit to sustaining the state of Afghanistan with economic assistance and with continued training for the Afghan security forces, to include increased combat support for as long as is required. The objective of this exercise must be to prevent the Afghan state from losing further territorial control. If it loses further territorial control, its viability will be increasingly at risk, and its capacity to bargain with its adversaries will diminish. So the success of a political settlement or any effort that is made towards peace hinges fundamentally on keeping the Afghan state as robust as possible. And at the end of the day, as Minister Tiwari pointed out, there is no substitute for the United States in this regard. Second, we do need a unified civil-military strategy for this purpose. It cannot be a military strategy divorced from the strategic objective of protecting the state and creating a settlement. A civilian strategy that aims at these goals without a requisite military strategy to back it up will fail. And so we need a unified civil-military strategy. And this strategy will have to be executed in Kabul, not in Washington. The third thing that the United States ought to do is to now forthrightly accept that it is a co-belligerent in Afghanistan and be prepared to engage in direct negotiations with the Taliban while continuing to target the Taliban Shura leadership as is appropriate. The Taliban may have a sanctuary in Pakistan, but that sanctuary is guaranteed by the US willingness or reticence not to target that leadership. If the US is willing to target the Taliban Shura leadership, especially those Shura leaders that are recalcitrant with respect to the questions of negotiation, in my view, it only increases the possibility that we will be able to have a sustained conversation, which, by the way, will not be consummated in weeks or months, possibly years, if we are lucky. Fourth, we need to encourage the government of Afghanistan to begin a process of internal reconciliation as well, to bring Afghans of all persuasions to a common conversation. The advantage of having such a conversation is that first it allows the Afghan state to create a unified negotiating position for any political settlement that may occur. But equally importantly, it allows Afghan provincial, regional, and district leaders to reach out to local Taliban cadres in an effort to bring them into the process. Fifth, we need to have an honest conversation with Pakistan about its own regional aims and regional objectives. If we cannot satisfy Pakistan's legitimate needs, this process will fail. But Pakistan's legitimate needs cannot be defined in terms of excessive ambition that requires either the subordination of the Afghan state to Pakistan or a Pakistani veto over Afghanistan's own strategic choices with respect to its international partnerships. If Pakistan can live with this reality, then I think there is an opportunity for creating a new consensus between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the United States. And lastly, the US has to make a considered effort to rebuild the regional consensus in Afghanistan. When Ambassador Khalilzad was in Kabul, there was a regional consensus about Afghanistan. There was a consensus about the aims, about the strategies, and the means. That consensus has fractured. And today, the Russians have an agenda in Afghanistan, the Afghan state has its own agenda in Afghanistan, Pakistan has its own agenda, and the United States some other agenda. We have to go back to rebuilding that consensus if we are to succeed. I want to end on just one note. We will continue to have problems in Afghanistan if every entity involved in this country reaches for what it believes to be the maximalist version of its own self-interest. If every country reaches for the maximalist version, you end up in the most wicked of prisoners' dilemmas, where in the search for the perfect, you end up with the outcome of the worst. I think it's time for all the players involved in Afghanistan to think of the second best, because the second best is probably the best we can achieve in the circumstances, and the second best may turn out to be an outcome that produces one that is satisfying to the Afghan state all around. Thank you.